The envelope sat on my dining table for 2 days before I finally opened it. I told myself I was busy, that I had errands, that I wasn't ready for unnecessary conversations. But the truth was simpler. I didn't trust it. Not the paper, not the handwriting, not the name signed at the bottom. Vanessa. My daughter-in-law had never invited me anywhere in the 10 years she'd been married to my son, Daniel. Not for coffee, not for birthdays, not even after my husband passed away 4 months ago. Yet here it was. Olivia, let's have lunch this Friday. Just the two of us. I'd really love to spend time together. I read it 3 times, tracing the elegant loops of her handwriting. It looked warm, thoughtful, almost sincere. Almost. I set it down again and stared at the empty chair across from me, the one that used to belong to Henry. 42 years of marriage, and suddenly silence had become my loudest companion. During those first weeks after losing him, it wasn't Daniel who came by. It wasn't Vanessa. It was my niece, Claire. She showed up with groceries, stayed late into the evenings, reminded me to eat when I forgot, and sat quietly beside me when the grief was too heavy for words. So why now? Why Vanessa? The restaurant she chose answered part of that question. It was the kind of place Henry and I only visited on anniversaries. White tablecloths, polished glass, and a host who looked at you like he was doing you a favor by acknowledging your existence. Vanessa was already there when I arrived, seated near the window, sunlight catching the gold bracelet on her wrist as she waved at me with exaggerated enthusiasm. Olivia, she called, her voice bright enough to turn heads. You look amazing. I smiled politely as I sat down. I'm glad you came, she added quickly. I was worried you might cancel. I considered it, I said honestly. For a brief moment, something flickered behind her smile. Then it was gone. She launched into conversation immediately. Vacations, social events, Daniel's career, her new fitness routine. It flowed endlessly, like a rehearsed performance. Not once did she ask how I was doing. Not once did she mention Henry. I let her talk. I watched. I listened. And I waited. It didn't take long. Oh, I almost forgot, she said suddenly, as if remembering something trivial. I ran into Martin Keller the other day. My hand paused midair. Martin was our banker. He had handled Henry's accounts for years. What about him? I asked. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. He mentioned there are still some formalities regarding Henry's insurance. Just paperwork. Nothing complicated. Of course. There it was. I set my fork down carefully. And he told you this why? She smiled again, softer this time, more calculated. He was concerned you might feel overwhelmed. I offered to help. How kind of you. I even brought the documents, she added, reaching for her bag. And, well, Martin is actually stopping by shortly, just to make things easier. Right on cue, a man appeared beside our table. Perfect timing. Perfect setup. Olivia, Martin said smoothly, sliding into the chair beside Vanessa. Good to see you. I nodded, saying nothing. Dessert arrived, something I hadn't ordered. As he opened his briefcase and began explaining terms I already understood perfectly well. Standard procedure, he said. Given Daniel is your only son, it's practical to arrange shared access. It simplifies everything. Shared access. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't help. This was a transfer of control. Vanessa gently pushed a pen toward me. Just sign here, she said softly. I looked at the paper, then at her, then at my hands. They weren't shaking. Excuse me, I said. I need a moment. Inside the restroom, I locked the door behind me and leaned against the sink. For a second, the room spun. Then I took out my phone. There was only one person I trusted. Claire answered on the first ring. Aunt Olivia? I need you, I said. 10 minutes later, everything had changed. When I returned to the table, the atmosphere was expectant. Anticipation hung in the air. Well, Vanessa asked. Martin adjusted the papers. Ready. I sat down calmly. Then I smiled. I'm afraid there's no need, I said. They both froze. What do you mean? Vanessa asked. The funds, I continued, folding my hands neatly on the table, have already been transferred. Transferred? Martin repeated. Yes. To where? Vanessa demanded. I held her gaze. To Claire. The silence was immediate and absolute. Her expression cracked first, confusion, then disbelief, then something far uglier. You gave it to her? She snapped. No, I said evenly. I entrusted it to someone who actually showed up when I needed help. Martin slowly closed his briefcase. Vanessa's hand trembled slightly against the table. That money belongs to the family. It still does, I replied. Just not in the way you expected. I didn't stay for dessert, or for the argument that followed, or for the mask Vanessa no longer bothered to wear. For the first time since Henry died, I walked out of that restaurant feeling something unfamiliar. Not grief, not loneliness, something stronger. Control. That evening, the knock on my door came hard and fast. I knew who it was before I opened it. Mom, what did you do? Daniel's voice was sharp, strained, nothing like the boy I had raised. Vanessa stood behind him, silent, watching. I stepped aside and let them in. And as they crossed the threshold, I realized something with absolute certainty. This wasn't over. Not even close. The door had barely closed behind them before the tension filled every corner of the house. Daniel didn't even take off his coat. He stood in the middle of the hallway like a storm that had been building for months, maybe years, finally breaking. Vanessa lingered a step behind him, arms crossed, her expression controlled but sharp, like she was measuring every word before deciding whether to strike. What were you thinking? Daniel demanded.
No greeting, no hesitation.
Just accusation. I moved slowly into the living room, not because I was afraid of him, but because I refused to be rushed. I needed to sit, to anchor myself before this turned into something uglier. Hello, Daniel, I said calmly. It's nice to see you too. Don't do that, he snapped, following me. Don't pretend this is normal. I lowered myself into Henry's armchair, the leather still creaking the same way it always had. You're right, I said quietly. It's not normal. None of this is. Vanessa stepped forward then, her voice smoother, almost rehearsed. Olivia, we're just trying to understand. You transferred a significant amount of money without discussing it with your own son. I didn't realize I needed permission, I replied. Daniel let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. Permission? That's not what this is about, and you know it. That money was supposed to stay in the family. It did, I said. Claire is family. That's not the same thing, he shot back. I'm your son. I studied his face, then really looked at him. The expensive haircut, the tension in his jaw, the impatience in his eyes. Somewhere along the way, the boy who used to run into my arms after school had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. When is the last time you came here before today? I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough. I've been busy, he said. 3 months, I replied. 3 months, Daniel. That's how long it's been since you stepped into this house. Since you checked if I was eating, sleeping, surviving. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. And yet, I continued, you found time to arrange a meeting with a banker and bring legal documents to a restaurant. That was to help you, Vanessa interjected quickly. No, I said, turning to her. That was to help yourselves. Silence dropped heavily between us. Daniel's voice lowered, more dangerous now. You're making a mistake. I don't think I am. You gave away Dad's money, he pressed. Do you even understand what you've done? I understand perfectly, I said. Do you? His eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It was time. I know about the debt, I said. The effect was immediate. Vanessa's posture stiffened. Daniel went completely still. What debt? He asked too quickly. I held his gaze. Don't insult me by pretending. I spoke to someone at the bank. You tried to refinance your house again. That's none of your business, Vanessa snapped. It became my business the moment you tried to use me to fix it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. You don't understand how things work. Then explain it to me. I interrupted. Explain how you ended up owing hundreds of thousands of dollars.
He stopped.
For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, quietly, almost reluctantly, he said, 420,000. The number hung in the air like a weight pressing down on all of us. For what? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Vanessa did. Investments, she said. And expenses. Lifestyle, I corrected. Daniel looked away. I didn't need more details. I had already seen enough. The vacations, the new car, the constant upgrades, the way everything in their life seemed just slightly too polished to be sustainable. You thought Henry's insurance would fix it, I said. It would have helped, Vanessa replied sharply. For how long? I asked. A year? Maybe 2? And then what? Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly, just enough to show the crack. We could have figured it out, he muttered. No, I said firmly. You would have postponed the collapse. Vanessa stepped closer, her composure finally slipping. You're being selfish. I almost laughed. Selfish. I repeated. After everything that just happened? Yes, she said. You chose Claire over your own son. I chose the person who didn't disappear when I needed help. That's not fair, Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he changed tactics. If you don't fix this, he said slowly, things are going to change. There it was. Not a request. A warning. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not fear, but clarity. They already have, I said. He took a step closer. I mean between us. I met his eyes. Then say it clearly. He hesitated, then forced the words out. If you don't reverse the transfer, don't expect us to be part of your life anymore. The sentence landed harder than I expected, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed everything. Vanessa watched me carefully, as if waiting for me to break. For a moment, I almost did. 40 years of motherhood doesn't disappear easily. The instinct to protect your child, to fix things, to make peace, it doesn't just vanish. But then I remembered the restaurant, the papers, the trap, and the months of silence before it. I stood up slowly. Then I guess this is goodbye, I said. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. You don't mean that.
Ido.
My voice didn't shake. That's not the son I raised, I continued. The son I raised wouldn't have ambushed me. He wouldn't have tried to manipulate me into signing away my security. You're overreacting. No. I cut in. I'm finally reacting appropriately. Vanessa scoffed. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but not for the reasons you think. Daniel stared at me, something uncertain flickering in his expression now. For the first time, he wasn't in control of the situation. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed quietly. It's not. He turned sharply and walked toward the door. Vanessa followed, but not before giving me one last look, cold, calculating. Enjoy your decision, she said. Let's see how it feels when you're alone. The door slammed behind them. The house fell silent again. But this silence felt different. Heavier, yet clearer. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, listening to the fading sound of their car. Then my legs gave out slightly, and I sank back into the armchair. The adrenaline drained, leaving behind exhaustion and something else. Relief. I reached for my phone and called Claire. She answered immediately. "Are you okay?" I looked around the quiet house, at the life Henry and I had built, at the space that now felt both emptier and somehow more honest. "I think so," I said. Then, after a pause, I added quietly, "But I may have just lost my son." The silence that followed their departure didn't fade. It settled in, like dust in a house no one visits anymore. Days passed, then weeks, and eventually time stopped feeling like something that moved forward. It simply stretched. My phone stayed quiet. No messages, no calls, no accidental dial from a grandchild pressing the wrong button. Even the calendar on my wall looked abandoned, its empty squares marking nothing but the slow passage of days I had no reason to count. I found myself standing at the kitchen window more often than I care to admit, watching the street like I expected something to happen, like life might return if I just waited long enough. But nothing did. Claire was the only constant. She called every morning, every evening, sometimes in between. She didn't ask too many questions, didn't push me to talk when I didn't want to. She just showed up in the way that matters most, consistently. One evening, she came over with groceries and quietly started cooking while I sat at the table pretending to read a book I hadn't turned a page of in an hour. "You don't have to pretend with me," she said without looking up. I closed the book. "I'm not pretending," I replied. She gave me a small smile. "Then you're worse at coping than I thought." That made me laugh, a short, unexpected sound that felt foreign in my own throat. It was the first time I'd laughed since the argument. Later that night, after she left, I wandered into Henry's study. I hadn't been in there much since he passed. It felt untouched, like stepping into a moment that hadn't realized it was over yet. His chair still sat slightly pulled out from the desk, a pen resting exactly where he had left it, as if he might walk back in and continue whatever he had been working on. The air even smelled the same, paper, leather, and that faint trace of his cologne that lingered long after everything else faded. I sat down slowly. For a while I did nothing, just sat there, absorbing the quiet, letting memories rise without trying to stop them. Then, almost without thinking, I opened the drawer in front of me. Inside were neatly organized documents, just as I expected. Henry had always been meticulous, everything labeled, dated, categorized. It was one of the many ways he had kept our life stable, predictable, safe. But something felt off. I couldn't explain it at first. It was just a small detail. The drawer didn't close properly. It stopped just short, like something inside was preventing it from sliding all the way in. I pulled it open again, this time paying closer attention. My fingers traced along the bottom until I felt it, a slight ridge that didn't belong. A hidden latch. My heart started to beat faster. I pressed it. The base of the drawer shifted, revealing a concealed compartment beneath. Inside was a notebook. Simple. Dark cover. No label. I hesitated before picking it up, as if opening it might change something I wasn't ready to face. But deep down, I already knew Henry hadn't left things unfinished. He never did. I opened it. The first page was dated nearly 5 years ago. "I'm writing this on legal advice. I hope I'm wrong. God, I hope I'm wrong." My chest tightened. Page after page, Henry had documented everything. Every request Daniel had made. Every opportunity that required money. Every time Vanessa had brought up finances under the guise of casual conversation. It wasn't just notes, it was a pattern. A clear, undeniable pattern that had been forming long before I ever noticed. Daniel asked for $15,000 today. Said it was for a short-term investment.
No documentación.
Declined. Argument followed. Vanessa mentioned early inheritance again. Tried to frame it as financial planning. I don't trust the way she asks. They're starting to feel entitled to money that isn't theirs yet. This worries me more than the requests themselves. I had to stop reading. My hands were trembling too much to continue. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what I was seeing. All this time, I thought I had been protecting myself, that I had made the decision to transfer the money on instinct, out of caution. But this wasn't instinct. This was preparation. Henry had known. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to document it. Enough to plan for it. I picked up the notebook again, forcing myself to continue. The entries grew more urgent the closer they came to the present. Spoke with Martin today. Adjusted policy structure. He questioned it, but I insisted. If anything happens to me, Olivia must not be vulnerable. Meeting with attorney next week. Finalizing protections. Claire is aware. She understands the responsibility. My breath caught.
Claire knew?
I flipped to the last page. There was a note, written more carefully than the others. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain everything. I'm sorry for that. I thought I had more time. I pressed my hand against my mouth. You've always trusted people more easily than I have. It's one of the things I love most about you, but it also means I needed to be cautious for both of us. Tears blurred the ink. Trust Claire.
She knows what to do.
I made sure of that. And Olivia, you're stronger than you think. You always have been. I closed the notebook slowly, holding it against my chest. For the first time since Henry died, I cried without holding back. Not just from grief. From understanding. He hadn't left me unprotected. He had prepared me. Even for this. The next morning felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt like something pressing down on me. It felt like space, something I could choose how to fill. I called Claire. You knew, I said when she answered. She didn't pretend not to understand. Yes, she replied softly. Why didn't you tell me? Because he asked me not to unless it became necessary. I looked at the notebook on the table. It became necessary. I know, she said. And you did exactly what he hoped you would. I let that sink in. For the first time, I didn't question my decision. I understood it. Later that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Not urgent, not aggressive, just deliberate. When I opened it, I wasn't prepared for who I saw. Vanessa's mother, Eleanor. She stood there, composed as always, her expression polite but tense. Olivia, she said. May I come in? I stepped aside. Something told me this conversation was long overdue. And this time, I was ready for it. Eleanor didn't remove her coat when she stepped inside, which told me this wasn't a visit meant to linger. She stood in the middle of the living room for a moment, looking around as if measuring the space, or perhaps remembering how it used to feel when everything was still intact. I gestured toward the sofa, and after a brief hesitation, she sat down, her posture as straight and composed as ever, though there was something unsettled beneath it. I took the chair opposite her, folding my hands in my lap, waiting. I had learned over the past few months that silence often revealed more than questions. I'll be direct, she said finally. Daniel and Vanessa are not doing well. I nodded slowly. I suspected as much. Her eyes flickered with mild surprise, but she continued. Their situation has deteriorated, financially and otherwise. There are rumors circulating, at the club among friends. It's becoming difficult for them to maintain appearances. Appearances can be expensive, I said quietly. She didn't smile. They told me what happened. About the money. About your decision. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. They believe you acted impulsively, that you've been influenced by Claire. I finished for her. Eleanor inclined her head slightly. Yes. I let out a soft breath. And you? What do you believe? She hesitated longer this time. I believe there must be more to the story than what I've been told. That's why I'm here. That at least was honest. I leaned back slightly, studying her. For years, Eleanor had been cordial, distant, and largely uninvolved. Not unkind, but never particularly curious either. Today was different. Today she was searching. Did Vanessa mention their debt? I asked. The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Eleanor's fingers tightened slightly against her handbag. She said they've had some financial setbacks. Temporary ones. $400,000 isn't temporary, I said. Her composure cracked, just for a second. That's not possible. It is, I replied evenly. And it didn't happen overnight. She looked away, absorbing that. I could almost see the pieces shifting in her mind, rearranging into something less comfortable than the version she'd been given. She came to you for money too, didn't she? I asked gently. That hit. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. Families support each other. That's not what I asked. A long pause followed. Then, quietly, she said, yes. I nodded. How much? That's not. It matters, I said firmly, because this isn't new behavior. It's a pattern. She exhaled slowly, as if surrendering to the inevitability of the conversation. Enough, she admitted. Enough that I've started to question where it's all going. I stood up then, walking to the study, without asking her to follow. After a moment, I heard her footsteps behind me. The notebook lay on Henry's desk where I had left it. I picked it up and handed it to her. What is this? She asked. Truth, I said. She hesitated before opening it, but once she did, she didn't stop. Her eyes moved quickly at first, then slower, more carefully, as the entries became harder to dismiss. I watched her face change, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to something heavier. Understanding. When she finally closed the notebook, her hands were no longer steady. He knew, she whispered. Yes. And you had no idea? Not until recently. She sank into the chair beside the desk, looking suddenly older than she had when she arrived. They told me you were confused, she said after a moment. That grief had affected your judgment. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Convenient. Eleanor looked up at me, and for the first time, there was no distance in her expression, only something raw and uncertain. I think, she said slowly, that I may have made the same mistake you did. Which one? Believing what I wanted to believe. The room fell silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt like something shifting, something realigning itself beneath the surface. They're in deeper trouble than I realized, she admitted. And if what you're saying is true, they were planning to use you to fix it. They already tried, I said. She nodded faintly. I see that now. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, what are you going to do? I thought about that. About Henry's letter. About Claire. About Daniel. I already did it, I said. I protected what needed to be protected. And your son? That question lingered. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. That depends on him. Eleanor stood slowly, holding the notebook as if it weighed more than paper should. May I keep this? She asked. I considered it, then nodded. Yes. But return it. I will. She walked toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth," she said without turning around, "I don't think you're the one who should be apologizing." The door closed quietly behind her. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt prepared. For the first time, I understood the full picture. Not just the conflict, not just the betrayal, but the structure beneath it. The years of decisions, the slow drift, the choices that had led us here. And more importantly, I understood my role in it. Not as a victim, not as someone who had been blindsided, but as someone who had finally chosen to see clearly. A few days later, the first real sign of change came from somewhere unexpected. A knock at the door. Soft this time, almost hesitant. When I opened it, my breath caught. Michael, my grandson, stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, cheeks red from the cold, eyes uncertain but determined. "Hi, Grandma," he said. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I stepped aside quickly.
Come in.
He walked in slowly, looking around like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be there. "Does your father know you're here?"
I asked.
He shook his head.
No.
A familiar knot formed in my chest. "Michael, I just wanted to see you," he said quickly. "I miss you." That was all it took. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tighter than I intended, as if I could make up for months of absence in a single moment. "I missed you too," I said softly. We sat in the kitchen, and I made him something to eat while he talked about school, about his sister, about small things that suddenly felt incredibly important. But eventually, the conversation shifted. "Mom and Dad fight a lot now," he said quietly. I didn't interrupt. "They talk about money," he continued, "and about you." I set the plate in front of him, choosing my words carefully. "What do they say?" He hesitated. "That you chose someone else over us." I sat down across from him. "That's not what happened," I said gently. "I made a decision to protect something important. From us." "No," I said. "From a situation that wasn't safe." He frowned slightly, trying to understand. "They say you're confused," he added. I smiled faintly. "Do I seem confused to you?" He shook his head immediately. "Then maybe," I said softly, "there's more to the story than what you've been told." He nodded slowly. After a while, he asked the question I had been dreading. "Can I stay here?" My heart tightened. "Oh, sweetheart," I reached across the table, taking his hand. "I wish you could, but we need to tell your parents where you are." He looked down. "They won't even notice right away." That hurt more than anything else he had said. Still, I reached for my phone. Some lines couldn't be crossed. Not like this. As it rang, I realized something important. This wasn't just about money anymore. It never really had been. It was about truth. About responsibility. About what kind of family we were going to be from this point forward. Daniel answered on the first ring. And just like that, the silence between us finally broke. By the time winter settled in fully, something inside me had changed in a way I couldn't undo, not that I wanted to. The silence that once felt like punishment had transformed into something quieter, steadier, almost like a boundary I had finally learned to draw. The house no longer felt abandoned. It felt mine again. Not ours, not theirs, not something tied to expectations or obligations, just mine. And in that space, I began to rebuild not my old life, but a new one, shaped by clearer vision and harder truths. Daniel did come that night after Michael called him. I saw the car headlights sweep across the front window before I even heard the engine stop. Michael tensed beside me, his small hand tightening around mine, and I squeezed it gently before standing. When I opened the door, Daniel looked different, not just tired, worn down. His face carried something heavier than anger now. Fear, maybe, or the slow realization of consequences catching up. "Is he here?" he asked immediately. "He's safe," I replied.
Come in.
He stepped inside without argument, his eyes going straight to Michael. Relief crossed his face so quickly it almost hurt to witness. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The tension, the distance, the months of silence. He walked over and pulled his son into a tight embrace. "Don't ever do that again," he said, his voice low, strained. "Do you understand me?" Michael nodded against his shoulder. I stood a few steps away, watching them, feeling something complicated unfold inside me. This was still my son. Broken, flawed, lost, but still mine. After a few minutes, Daniel straightened and turned to me. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was real. "Sit down," I told him. He hesitated, then nodded. Michael stayed close, sitting quietly beside him, as if afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too far. For a while, none of us spoke. The ticking clock on the wall filled the silence. Then Daniel exhaled slowly. "I've made a mess of things," he said. I didn't respond right away. "I know," I said finally. He gave a small, humorless smile. "At least you're honest." "I've always been honest," I replied. "You just weren't listening." That landed. He looked down at his hands, turning his wedding ring slowly around his finger. "We're in deeper trouble than I thought," he admitted. "It's not just debt anymore. It's everything. Credit, loans, penalties. I don't even know where it stops." "And Vanessa?" I asked. He paused. "She still thinks we can fix it without changing anything," he said. "Sell one thing, take another loan, shift things around. Keep the image intact. And you?" He looked up at me then, and for the first time in months, I saw something familiar in his eyes. "I don't want to live like that anymore," he said quietly. The honesty in his voice made something in my chest loosen, just slightly. "What are you going to do?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "I spoke to the financial advisor you sent me. He said bankruptcy might be the only real option. Start over. Clean." "That's not easy," I said. "I know," he replied. "We'd lose a lot. The house, probably. Definitely the lifestyle Vanessa's used to." "And your marriage?" That question hung between us. "I don't know," he said after a moment. "I think we want different things now." I nodded slowly. That didn't surprise me. "What do you need from me?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "Not money," he said quickly. "I know that's off the table. And I understand why." He paused. "I think I just need guidance. And maybe a chance to fix what I broke." I studied him carefully. Trust doesn't return in a single moment. It doesn't rebuild itself just because someone says the right words. But something in him had shifted. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough to notice. "That depends," I said, "on what you're willing to change." "Everything," he replied. "That's easy to say," I said calmly. "Harder to live." "I know." We sat in silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was cautious.
"Honest."
"Here's what I can offer," I said finally. "I will not give you money. That doesn't help you. It only delays the problem. But I will help you understand how to rebuild properly, step by step." He nodded. "And the children," I continued. "They are always welcome here. No conditions.
No arguments.
They are not part of this conflict." Michael looked up at me, hope flickering across his face. Daniel swallowed. "They've missed you." "I've missed them too." He hesitated again, then added, "I told them the truth. About everything." That surprised me. "All of it. As much as they need to know," he said. "That I was wrong. That this isn't your fault." I felt something shift again, deeper this time. "That matters," I said quietly. And he continued almost cautiously. "If things stabilize eventually, I'd like to make things right, not just financially. With you." I nodded once. We'll see, I said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something in between, a beginning. After they left that night, the house felt different again. Not full, not empty, balanced. I walked into Henry's study and sat in his chair, looking at the desk, the notebook, the life he had organized so carefully, even in its final stages. You saw this coming, I said softly into the quiet room. And he had. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to prepare me, enough to protect me, enough to trust that I would do what needed to be done when the time came. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, letting that thought settle. I hadn't handled everything perfectly. I had hesitated, doubted,
Grieved.
but in the end, I had stood my ground, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of understanding. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, things began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. Daniel followed through. He downsized, sold what needed to be sold, faced consequences instead of avoiding them. It wasn't easy to watch, but it was necessary. Vanessa resisted at first, then adapted in her own way, though the distance between them remained. Whether their marriage would survive, I didn't know. And for the first time, I understood that it wasn't my responsibility to decide. The children came by often. Michael first, then Lily. Their laughter returned to the house in small bursts at first, then more naturally, as if the walls themselves were remembering what it sounded like. Claire remained by my side through all of it, not as a guardian, not as a replacement, but as something steadier, a constant. One evening, as snow began to fall again, I found myself sitting in the car outside the house, watching the lights glow softly through the windows. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I felt like I had arrived somewhere, not at an ending, but at a place of clarity, of balance, of choice. You were right, I whispered, glancing at the empty seat beside me. Not because everything had worked out, not because the pain had disappeared, but because I had learned something far more important. Some things are worth holding on to, and some things, even when they break your heart, must be released. I stepped out of the car, walking toward the house, toward the light, toward whatever came next. And this time, I wasn't afraid of it.